Hello and welcome to another dive into the queerness of TV shows past. So, my fellow Slayers, as you might have guessed, this is going to be all about Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Or, not all of it, just the part that we can all agree is surely the most interesting, the gay part. I want to answer the question here of, was this show a fundamental show for a lot of queer people who grew up in the 90s and 2000s that presented relationships and openly gay individuals a good queer show? Or even a queer show at all? Because so often we take two paths of nostalgia, either dismissing the concerns because of our intense love for something formative, something essential to our identities, that to have it brought down from the pedestal we have put it on would almost be an attack on the self that you've created, or we hand wave it as all bad because of the time period it's from, and because of the most egregious offences that stand out from it, potentially disregarding elements that are interesting or well done by making such a sweeping consideration that truly does have the chance of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. In this video, I want to attempt to do the justice of seizing the truth from the jaws of our misinterpretations and hazy memories by digging into the episodes and the characters and the narratives and analysing the themes that we see from those and how that can build into our own long-term understanding of queerness and cinema. Oh, and also, before we really get into it, this is about the queer characters specifically, so forget people like Oz, Xander, Riley, Cordelia and Giles. They're not included in this party, no matter how much you might like them or want me to talk about them. Hint, the answers to all of them are chill dude who got done dirty, a lot of problems guy here and not because of his monster girl fetish, nice guy but got done dirty and turned into a piece of shit, the queen bee who got done dirty, and finally, probably one of the few characters whose arcs wasn't completely ruined in the show, apart from that bit where they did just, leave for a whole season because of, the actor was busy and couldn't be involved, so they had to just let them go, which made it look really awkward. It was Giles just abandoning Buffy again, because, that's not what she needed, but, his arc gets even more ruined in the comics, so, not good. It does feel like a lot of characters can't win anything. They start off, they develop, and then they just, crash and burn by the end, so I'm sure we'll come around to that in a chapter at some point, probably on Joss Whedon himself. Oh, and also, at that, I will be mentioning the creator of the show, Joss Whedon, and the writers of the show at some point. So don't worry if you think I'm gonna just sweep the terrible scandals about Joss Whedon and also the criticisms one can have about him under the rug. As much as I would love to say, Joss, we don't need to talk about it, we kinda do need to.
Let me rest in peace, let me get some sleep, let me take my love and bury it.
Now, some of you might be thinking, isn't it a bit strange to start with Larry Blaisdell? That isn't really a core character, or even one that people really talk about when they discuss Buffy the Vampire Slayer and queer stuff in it. Most people focus on, Willow and Tara, and Faith, and Kennedy. And some of you are probably also thinking, who the hell is Larry? Which, honestly, deep down, it's pretty rude to my boy Alice, and I need you to get on board with this super fast, ASAP. There's a chance that somebody called Alice is watching this video and I just gave them the fright of their life, and that's pretty funny. But also, all of you need to back the hell up on Larry Blaisdell. This guy is the perfect start point for talking about queer representation and queer interpretation in Buffy, because he is the first truly gay person we get in the show, that is openly gay in a very clear and concise manner. What better place to start than at the start. And yes, I probably should say human there, openly gay human, because when it comes to the vampires, sexuality seems kind of vague at best, something that we will cover further down the line. For right now, we are all in on learning about Larry, so we can get to grounds of what to expect from Buffy, and to start building our case of if all those nerds and baby queers who used this show to discover who they were picked a good show for it. Larry is kind of actually a decent metaphor for the show's very seesaw reputation amongst the queer community, as we first get our introduction to him being gay in the episode Phases. In this episode, Xander challenges Larry about him being the werewolf that served as the monster of the week, basing his suspicions on the fact that Larry talked about getting attacked by a huge dog, and also seemingly inspired by an interpretation of Larry as being metaphorically an animal, as we had seen him in a few previous episodes acting as a stereotypical jock from the 90s, i.e. sexually harassing women like crazy till Buffy puts him on the floor and physically intimidating other men into being afraid of him like Xander. But as Xander and we discover in a pretty funny little dialogue, Larry is not a werewolf and is in fact gay, and has been basically acting the way he does as a form of covering up that queer identity. A cover-up that is reasonably common to actual gay stories, as being a gay man is often seen as effeminate, a thing associated with weakness that is then counteracted by the person leaning heavily into embodying all the worst aspects of masculinity, so that people will not challenge them on that gender identity that they have internally called into question through their own discovery of their sexuality. So far, a big star for Buffy doing a coming out story in a realistic way, that isn't the dominant narrative of the episode, but is more used as a method for making comedy at Xander's expense. Because Xander, doing his normal Xander stuff, presented his investigation of Larry as if he knows about Larry because he knows what it's like himself, basing the whole, I know what it's like to be an animal inside because of the hyena episode where I got hyena spirited for a little bit and I ate a pig raw and I could have accidentally eaten a principal because Buffy's a weird show. But all of that leads to Larry thinking that Xander is a closeted homosexual for the entire next season, basically. Not even kidding. This comes up again in Season 3's episode Earshot, where Xander is once again interrogating Larry in the hopes of discovering something. This time trying to figure out if he is the potential school shooter/murderer that Buffy discovered with her aspect of the demon telekinesis. No, don't ask questions about that whole thing. That's a perfectly reasonable plotline to have in a Buffy episode, okay? Just move along. And Xander tries to imply that hiding your gayness could lead to some bitterness for Larry, could lead him to lash out in a way like a school shooter does. Which doesn't end up panning out, as Larry just tells him that he's out to everyone. So out that even his grandma is setting him up with guys.
Man, I'm out. I'm so out I've got my grandma fixing me up with guys.
That's, nice.
Which is A, tight as fuck for Larry, good on him for figuring that out, and being a gay person who's accepted by people is a pretty awesome thing, and B, shout out to Larry's grandma, you fucking legend. Nice one. What we get from both of these scenes, and from the comedy made at Xander's expense, is that being gay is not necessarily wrong. Xander doesn't seem to be worried that he is seen as gay because being gay is bad, or that because it makes him effeminate. He's more taken aback because he isn't gay and he doesn't know how to get out of this without exposing the fact that he's trying to search for a school shooter because of Buffy's mind powers or looking for a werewolf, something that he can't tell people. Although his difficulties with women and monster women should be taken as some kind of sign of, some shit going on with Xander. And Larry also has some interesting comments in response to Xander's immediate anxiety and worry in regards to Larry thinking that Xander is gay. Telling Xander how he would never out him and that he needs to take things at his own pace.
Larry, no, I am not.
Of course not. Don't worry. I wouldn't do that to you. Your secret's safe with me.
God fucking damn it, do I love Larry. Like, you just like to see a kid who was a massive asshole and a sexist piece of shit flip the script and become kinder and happier because he no longer has the boiling difficulty inside him that is causing him to lash out like that. Now, that's all the positive Larryness out of the way. Actually, no, wait. I lied. One more final comment. I liked how Larry being gay didn't make the writers suddenly change him into a gay stereotype. He acted pretty much like the same dude, just with less harassment of women and bullying of other people. He was still a big, stocky, masculine football guy, and that is reassuring as positive representation for a lot of people from that time period, who would see gay men as feminine, as embodying stereotypes that are associated with womanly traits, a presentation inspired by media adopting the worst impressions and cis ideas about gay men that often led to a lot of people who didn't like that or didn't see themselves as that, struggling to find their identity in what they saw of queerness. So, there's a lot of ticks for Larry here, but as I said earlier, where there is light, there is darkness. Where there are compliments for Buffy and Joss Whedon, there must also be criticism and issues taken with how they dealt with certain things or themes that they chose. And there is one very large, overwhelming issue to take with how Larry was represented, or to put it better, how his story ended on the show. See, in Graduation Day Part 2, as the school goes into battle against Mayor Wilkins, an honestly incredibly great villain and seasonal arc that might be one of the best in the entire run of the show, this whole family man who represents good old traditional American values, but is also a monstrous cultist attempting to ascend himself into a demon, and whose facade of being a family man politician doesn't fade away at all.
Fine. You know, it's nice to see you're not one of those slacker types running around town today. Yeah. Torture Buffy. Killing her's fine. Just make it a slow one.
My favorite kind.
Wonderful, wonderful. We don't want a replacement Slayer anytime soon. They can't all turn out like my girl Faith. Have fun.
Let's do it.
Try to have her home by 11.
Except for in the one rare circumstance after Faith is put into a coma through the combined efforts of herself and Buffy, and... Okay, we're getting a little off track here. I really like Buffy, so tangenting is a serious problem. Back to my guy Larry. During this battle, Larry is doing a great job of holding a flamethrower, before he is unfortunately swept up by Mayor Wilkins' massive snake tail, and we see him hit the ground pretty frickin' hard and fucking die immediately. Now, this is a little shocking, because he's the only named character on the good guy's side who bites the dust during this battle. There are plenty of unnamed extras playing students who get fucked up by vampires, and we later learn from Harmony that she was killed and turned into a vampire at this event. But Larry was the only one who we had previously become aware of and was, like, written into the show in a way that we knew about. And also, like, it was very visible that he died. Like, it was right in your face. Now, this is all kinds of concerning, because it's not clear why it had to happen, as killing a named character would supposedly serve the purpose of showing how serious or threatening a villain can be. That's one of the main literary uses of that. Think Angelus and his murder of Jenny Calendar, which is honestly an incredible use of that narrative trope in the episode Passion, which leads to the scene of Giles getting home to all that romantic setup, and then walking upstairs to find Jenny dead on his bed, which really sold the audience, and me especially, on how much of a bastard and how cruel Angelus was, how different he is to Angel, and how we need to take him seriously. But by this point, we already know that Mayor Wilkins is terrifying. I mean, Larry's death isn't happening midway through a season to provide motivation. It's happening in the last 20 minutes of the episode and the season, and it's not even a big deal. No characters mourn Larry afterwards, and when the mayor is defeated, everyone has a big moment about the end of high school, while the only gay guy we know is lying dead over there with nobody giving a shit about it, I guess. No, this death doesn't serve any story purpose, or provide something to us as an audience. It doesn't give us any more insight into the mayor, or justification for them being a bad person who needs to be dealt with. It only serves a single thing. A single thing that most gay people can recognise from its usage in other media, and that is the bury your gays trope. This is a really common criticism levied towards a lot of modern media, and its roots are a little bit more tricky than just explicitly bad. See, it originated in the 19th century as a way for queer writers to write same-sex couples, as it allowed them to get past censorship laws by having one member of the gay couple die, and the other one going back to the straight life because they're convinced of how bad it was. Obviously this isn't good, but as the only way that they could get themselves into stories at all, it's kind of what they had to do. This expanded over time to include non-queer creators doing it, and to it being used for basically whenever a gay person gets introduced and then has to have a bad ending in the story, with the same justification existing, that of it being the only way to get past the evangelical and rigidly straight cis rating systems that America had, which would only be okay with queer representation if it was shown to ultimately end in disaster or death. The gays had to be punished for their crime of being gay on the screen, but that idea of ratings and censorship wasn't so true by the time that Buffy was around. Undeniably, the publishing company probably had something to say about it. I mean, they refused to let Joss Whedon make Willow bisexual because it was deemed to be too confusing/deviant from a norm that cis people and straight people can understand, which we'll get into again later. But this wasn't being done for legal purposes anymore. The suffering of gay people in this kind of media was being done merely because it was either an established trope or because it was a feed that cis-straight audiences would not accept the gay person unless they died horribly. There was no requirement to do it, it was just creators doing it because it's how it had been done. Because all of that isn't a good excuse for how Larry bit the dust. Because a show that was far more popular and far more mainstream than Buffy that was running around the same time was Friends. Something we literally just covered in this video here, go check it out, and that had a lesbian couple whose ending was that they got married and lived in love together. Which continually reinforces my question of why did Larry have to not just die, but be basically erased from the show entirely? I mean, he was killed in such a way that he couldn't come back like Harmony, couldn't move to another show like Cordelia, and wasn't, I guess, even memorialized within the show itself. His death served no function in the arc of that episode. It didn't even serve a function as fulfilling Larry's arc, because his whole arc that we knew about was that he came out as gay and was living happily as a gay dude. It wouldn't be so startling or so obviously a case of bury your gays if Larry wasn't the only person who visibly died on screen, and if his death wasn't so utterly banal. And for a lot of gay people, I can imagine that being kinda horrifying. I mean, here's the only representation that you've got so far, the only bright light amidst a sea of straights and sexuality uncertains, and then he gets murked and erased. And like I said, we can kind of see a theme here that will continue throughout the rest of the discussion about Buffy and queerness. That for every good thing that gets done, there is a poor choice or real straight hours shit that ruins it, that hurts that representation. And while it could be easy just to write it off, I think it's far more useful to take note of it, and to recognise it for what it is, because a lot of modern queer writers and shows are going to be using Buffy as a blueprint. So this analysis is hopefully an important or useful thing to do. I think it's important for every video essayist to pretend that what they're doing here is important and useful and will have an impact on the world or will make, things more good. Jesus Christ, I'm a bad writer. Look, at the end of the day, it will make me feel better to pretend that, okay? So let's just go with it. Now it's time to move on from the character that nobody really talks about, shout out to my boy Larry, to the ones that everybody talks about with Buffy. Them there lesbian witches that really dominate the mid-show as a shining point of queerness and young queer people that we can connect with, that I'm sure won't end badly at all.
But your power shone brighter than any I've known.
So the big one. And to talk about the big one, I actually want to go into it before it even starts, with pre-season 4 Willow, because there are hints dropped towards Willow's queerness, and it also does reinforce that whole Willow was supposed to be bisexual, but the network didn't allow it to be labelled or seen like that. She has to apparently be either gay or straight. Stop riding the fence, will you guys? Damn, like, just pick a side. Which is pretty patently bi-erasure as part of this weird push to be gay accepting, but not so gay that it confuses the straights who just can't handle the idea that somebody might not be in that binary system of sexual attraction in one direction. Because, we're getting a sidetracked here, but Willow does love men. She does have feelings towards them of a romantic and sexual nature that we see with Xander and Oz. Even if one of them is just a continual piece of shit towards her in every possible way, and the other ends up cheating on her with a werewolf and then bouncing the fuck out of the show. Now, some guy is going to bring up the fact that Willow obviously did cheat on Oz first with Xander, but all that got cleared up, and Oz took her back, and there was this explicit thing made of like, okay, that was a mistake and I'll never do it again, and it was very hurtful, and two cheating wrongs don't make a relationship right. Maybe there's a good reason why Willow starts exclusively dating just women, because I get it. But the whole bisexual stuff aside, which is, what the show basically said, the first and kind of only real pointer towards Willow's future sexuality comes from the episode Doppelgangland, when evil Willow is dragged into the normal timeline by Anya's attempt to reclaim her demonhood. No, sorry. Not that evil Willow. That's one we're going to discuss a little bit later. The other one. Yeah. That's the one I'm talking about right now. The vampire evil Willow. This whole episode is kind of a metaphor for Willow finding herself, becoming more confident and sure of who she is by seeing this vampire side of her that is freed from restraints and restrictions and sanity by adopting their persona to trick the vampires, and then airing her grievances about everyone taking advantage of her, and her willingness to be a doormat for her friends.
She bothered me. She's so weak and accommodating. She's always letting people walk all over her, and then she gets cranky with her friends for no reason. I just couldn't let her live.
It's kind of the Willow coming into her own episode of this particular season, and it makes a lot of sense in that light, that we also just see how evil Willow is attracted to herself. Just a lovely bit of self-incest there, but which Willow refers to as effectively her suspecting it was a gay thing, basically saying that she thinks that the evil Willow was a little bit gay. And I don't want to get into the philosophical argument of if sleeping with yourself is in fact actually gay, because Jesus Christ, this is not the time and place. And also, the evil Willow is not Willow. The actual Willow in the evil Willow is dead. It's confirmed consistently and heavily that vampires are a demon that has taken up residence in the memories and identity of the person whose soul has left. So we don't even need to have this debate in the first place, okay? She's not Willow. She's a different person. She's evil Willow. She then reassures herself, and with the assurance of the others around her, that vampires are nothing like the person they come from, which isn't true. And that leads to this interesting cut-off comment by Angel.
And I think I'm kind of gay.
Willow, just remember, a vampire's personality has nothing to do with the person it was.
Well, actually, it's a good point.
Now, it seems pretty clear from where that was going that Angel knows what's up. He knows that Willow absolutely does have some same-sex attraction feelings that just have not awoken yet, and the vampire Willow is merely the prelude to that, but out of respect of, not trying to question her identity in front of all these people and making it a big deal, he just doesn't go into it. And that prelude is a prelude that we get luded when she starts getting into Wicca at university and meets Tara. The Wicca as gay analogy is heavily relied upon for this whole arc, and for the continuing lesbian relationship between these two women. And that idea of witchcraft and Wicca being assigned to same-sex attraction has a rich history seeped in our world, going back to the 60s and 70s when women were looking for female-dominant cultures or religious analogues to inspire them, and found these earth-centric models that base themselves around women's connection to nature, and association with the goddesses of the past like Diana, Hecate, and Artemis, all of who represented more than just women tied to male needs and patriarchal positions of them or stories of them. And this removal of male-centric ideas also heavily led to the involvement of lesbianism in that early stages of serious political feminism and activism to tie itself to those concepts. The idea of lesbian and witches goes back even further than this, as inextricably tied together, to examples such as Maud Galt in 1600s Scotland, who is accused of being a witch because of her intimate relationship with many other women, which is a complicated history of being described by the accusers as rape and sexual assault of those women. Although how much of that is truth, and how much of that is designed as a way to preserve those women from accusations by placing the blame specifically on the scapegoat of Maud Galt, is difficult to say with the distance of records and time keeping us from any certainty. But what was fascinating was how she was tried as a witch and not as a lesbian. Because in the words of Julian Goodar in the European Witch Hunt, the shocked authorities found the idea of witchcraft easier to cope with than lesbianism. And that idea, that statement right there, brings us back round right to Buffy. I did it. I finally had a video essay with a historical tangent that led right back round to the pop culture I'm discussing. Truly today I have become the definitive essayist wanker. Because for audiences, the witchcraft of Willow and Tara, their bonding over their ties to magic and to true Wicca identity, is used as a lead-in for them to become lesbian. It's presented as a way for those close friends to spend so much time together, and clearly be in love with each other, but have it not specifically stated for 10 episodes. And Willow and Tara do explicitly end up in a relationship together. Even if that relationship does take a whole fucking season to finally let them have a kiss in Season 5, Episode 16's The Body. But even before then, it was subtextually clear that they were with each other in such a physical manner. And that kiss was monumental. It was the first time that we really got to see a lesbian relationship in a physical sense as well as a romantic one. A physical sense that continued into that whole scene in Once More with Feeling, when Willow, after an incredibly sweet but also kind of worrying song about how Tara is under her spell, literally reflecting the fact that Willow used her magic to mind wipe her girlfriend after a fight, which is holy shit, what the fuck stuff, proceeds to go down on Tara, who then rises into the air before cutting to Xander, talking about how they probably aren't doing any work. Buffy does give us this gay relationship, and it does go through many trials and tribulations, from Tara's family coming to try and take her away with them, having lied to her about the witchcraft being some kind of demonic heritage and curse, which yet again does really emphasize that whole being a witch as a feminist/lesbian analogy, and here we see it in terms of a family using religious terminology to try and keep its women under control of the patriarchal man of the house, to Willow's abuse of dark magic and addiction to witchcraft, which I honestly don't know how to interpret in consideration of the thematic nature of Wicca so far and magic. Is it supposed to be taking feminism and queerness too far? Is Willow getting too obsessed with being a gay person that she's getting into the dark side of gayness? Or is it the far more likely case that they turned the witchcraft into a dual metaphor for both gayness and drugs, which ended up leading to some rather confusing mixed metaphor stuff later down the line, as is likely to happen in a case where something is supposed to be both a good and a bad thing thematically for the audience to interpret, to Tara getting mind-wiped by Glory and giving us the first real taste of Vengeance Willow going all out and almost killing a goddess of hell through sheer gay wrath, to Oz coming back and trying to get with Willow again in New Moon Rising, claiming that he's finally tamed his werewolf side so he's no longer a danger to her, only for Willow and Tara being so close to one another to set him off again as he sees that they clearly like each other, and that makes him lose his meditational balance.
Are you two involved?
I have to go.
Because she never said anything to me like that. We talked all night and she never... Oh, stop! Is she in love with you? Tell me, is she? Run.
That episode does actually really paint Oz in a not so positive light, especially considering how he expresses concern for Willow using witchcraft in the past because it might hurt her. But in reality, he's the one who almost kills Tara because of his rage against the lesbian machine. That it's not the best pop culture reference ever made, but fuck it, I'm in charge here and I can do whatever the hell I want. It seems like Oz is like he's okay with them being gay, but also like deep down he's totally not okay. Like he expresses worries about Willow getting into witchcraft. He clearly wargs out at the idea that these people had been lesbians together. Like, Oz aside, this isn't a video about straight werewolves, this is about gay witches, and even through all of these difficulties thrown in the paths of these people, difficulties that cause them to break up and to nearly lose each other, Tara and Willow still stuck together, and then ended up finding each other in love once more by the end of season 6, with forgiveness and hope and a bright look towards the future for one of the strongest and most enduring relationships that Buffy had given us, that let us see that queer people can find happiness even if they have to struggle and almost fall into death or despair to do it. It's also one of the few bright bits in Buffy left, because everyone else is having a fucking terrible time. It got really dark real fast, so having Tara and Willow be together was a real smart move, because it's like, oh, not everything's bad, like there is some good parts still, like don't get too depressed. Queer people rejoice, because they are together again, and nothing, not even the embodiment of nerdy, toxic masculinity finessed into a single cruel, weak man and his bullets that pierce the heart of the feminine empowerment and freedom in this show can stop it. Oh. Right. That's not how the Tara and Willow story ends. It's difficult to talk about the queerness and the lesbian relationship after the end of seeing Red, because it hurts. It hurts in a way that is removed from just having characters that you like die and suffer and turn into villains. It hurts because for a lot of the queer community, especially young, nerdy people, they were the only young Sapphic pairing that we had to work with. And their pain and suffering was our pain and suffering. Their eventual reach of happiness was our happiness. Their untimely death is our death. For those who don't know, and if you don't, I have no idea how you're watching this video right now or have managed to get this far, Warren, a member of the Trio, a group of nerds and losers who use demonic and scientific power and knowledge to basically enact and become the worst parts of all those nerd fantasies from the 1990s around controlling women and power, shoots Buffy as revenge for her foiling of his plans, and then shoots once more over his shoulder as he runs away, accidentally shooting through a window and killing Tara, just after she and Willow have spent the day together, reconnecting from that whole Willow abusing dark magic and erasing Tara's memories so she could control her better. For which Willow spent much of the season weaning herself off that dark magic and spiraling into a connection towards witchcraft that reflects a more classical, evil, Christian interpretation of it than the Wicca that we've seen with Tara.
I'm getting out of here.
Oh, Donnie, don't. It was probably a cat or something like that. Oh, no, it's okay. He's not real. Seems real. Very real.
You summoned me, witch.
I didn't.
Did you raised hell with your magics?
God, this actually really does suck to talk about. And I'm trying to do it as plain and as factually devoid of emotion as possible, because if I stop for a second and I think about it, I'm pretty sure I'm just gonna cry. Willow then attempts to bring Tara back to life, like she did with Buffy, and upon failing, absorbs the power of all the books in the magic shop, transforming into a nigh unstoppable force of revenge, and becoming the true Dark Willow. She then proceeds to hunt down and flay Warren alive with her magic in a truly gruesome scene that doesn't even feel cathartic. Because I think at this point the numbness of what has happened and is happening has truly settled in. Warren deserves it, undeniably, but this revenge doesn't feel like a reward because Tara is still dead. So Willow proceeds to hunt down the rest of the trio, justifying it with regards to their involvement in empowering Warren, and also because anger and wrath and grief don't work off logic. It works from pure raw feeling. This puts her into conflict with her previous Scooby Gang friends, and she proceeds to beat the shit out of Buffy with the magic that she has, and then drains the empowered Giles of his gifted coven magic. This epitomizes in her turning her grief into a true weapon, desiring to apocalyptically destroy the world because she can't handle or deal with all the suffering that she is feeling. Ultimately, though, she's talked down by Xander of all people, swinging in to prove that he's not just the Zeppo of the group, but that through the pure nature of the fact that he can't fight or threaten anybody, and all he has is his words and the connections he's made, he uses that to reach out to Willow, and to get her to open up to him, and to make it clear that he doesn't see her as a monster that needs to be stopped like the others.
And I know you're about to do something apocalyptically evil and stupid, and hey, still want to hang. You're Willow.
Don't call me that.
The first day of kindergarten, you cried because you broke the yellow crayon, and you're too afraid to tell anyone. You've come pretty far. Ending the world, not a terrific notion. But the thing is, yeah, I love you.
Now, there are a lot of responses to this ending arc of Season 6, a lot of interpretations that people have and will undeniably keep having. But the first thing I want to get out of the way is the positives of it. And I know it can feel impossible to see a good side of this narrative, but I think that it's important that we're capable of doing so, beyond the queer hurt that might exist towards everyone involved in this. The idea of this ending is a perfectly fine one. It has a lot of emotional investment, has a lot of audience connection by the nature of us really knowing these characters, and then rewarding that investment by giving us a true sign of how people react to such events, and within their own character development / arcs. It makes sense that Willow would turn back to dark magic immediately upon losing her one true person and motivation to turning away from it in the first place, her love for Tara. It makes sense that Buffy and Anya and Giles would see her as too far gone, and they need to do what it takes to stop her. Buffy especially has constantly been doing what it takes to stop people she loves in almost every season. I mean, go all the way back to when she has to stab Angelus, who was back to being Angel again, to save the world. It makes sense that Xander, a guy who is constantly reminded by the show and by the people of how he can't provide any real physical or tangible support to the group, because everyone else is witches or demons or, researchers or the Slayer, and he's just a guy. But he's also Willow's oldest friend, and it makes sense that he wouldn't accept that conclusion that Willow needs to be stopped through, definitive violent action, and would reason that he has to at least try something. He has to try within what he has the ability to do. I've got no problems with the characters and the actors. I think they did an amazing job in these last few episodes of Season 6 of really selling us on all of this, of making the audience care and be involved. And that even extends to Xander, a character that I know a lot of pretty reasonable criticism and hatred is directed towards. I know that some people do get mad that it's Xander who talked Willow down at the end, who used words and the idea that he cares for her to stop her from destroying everything. But I ask you this seriously, like I asked those same friends. How else would you have it end? And who else could it have been at that point? It's far from perfect, but this is not one of those endings that is like that bury your gay trope. Xander doesn't de-queer Willow here after Tara dies. It's more of a here is a main character who cannot be defeated by power and strength in the normative masculine sense of combat and violence, but can only be reached by that emotional connection and stopped via that way, which I do actually really like as a theme when it comes up in shows. The idea that how you win is not through just beating them up, but is through realizing friendship and realizing the love that you can find between each other. Actually, it might have been a little bit better if Tara had been the one to stop Willow. Like in Willow's vast magical power she'd absorbed, and in her desperation to see Tara again, she was able to not bring her fully back per se, but to bring back her spirit, who would then convince Willow that this is not what she would have wanted, and that Willow needs to be stronger for her right now of all times. Personally, I think that's a better choice than Xander, but that's just me writing fanfic, and we know how I feel about me writing fanfic. I'm banned from doing it. Those Harry Potter fanfics from 10 years ago on that website that I'm sure nobody but me remembers, the one where like you go on it and like you like create your own character and then you like write up story stuff and you can like advance in like levels and stuff, and I made this like super edgy character who was like had a hidden darkness and like had to like fight the darkness, and like God, I was so cringe. Let's just move on. This is hurtful. But that's the nice thing I have to say about this Tara ending. That Joss Whedon clearly had already made a choice that was maybe not agreed upon by the actors and actresses, especially Amber Benson herself, as she talks about in a 2003 interview in which she discusses how the role she was playing moved beyond just being a character and into being a social commentary and motivation for a lot of people who followed her and looked up to her and Alison Hannigan as one of the first times that they'd really seen a young queer relationship exist that reflected their own identity. But we have to go beyond that honestly terrible fucking choice made by Joss Whedon. The people who played these roles in this narrative did an amazing job of selling us on it. Absolutely no hatred towards any of them for it. But that mention of the interview there with Amber Benson does lead us into the bad things of this whole resolution of Tara and Willow's iconic relationship. Because one thing she mentioned in that interview was how she would not come back to Buffy ever again, partly because she wanted to move on, and partly because she didn't trust Joss Whedon to bring her back and then not just kill her off again. Which apparently, according to her, he had quite a habit of doing, of telling actors that they were coming back with no intentions of getting buried, but then backtracking on that immediately and burying their character. In Tara's death and Willow's turn, what we find here is not so much a case of bury your gays, but instead a case of fridging and gay villain stereotyping. For those who don't know, fridging is a reference to a 90s Green Lantern comic, in which he finds his girlfriend dead and stuffed into his fridge, allowing him to engage in a grandiose and superheroic arc of development, all motivated by the woman having lost all her development / motivation because she's dead as fuck. Fridging is something that commonly only really occurs to women as well, and is designed to work around this protective vengeance perception of men in relationships, wherein the death of their partner triggers and enacts their story at the expense of the woman's. In Buffy, it's a little bit of a different story, of course, because this is a gay relationship, and therefore it's kind of flipping the trope on its head, because instead it's a woman who's going on a rampage spree after the death of her partner. But that hardly soothes the hurt from Willow losing the best person that ever happened to her, and the show losing one of its really core characters that drove the heart and emotion and really connected to a lot of the women in the audience, especially the queer ones. That murking of Scooby-Doo members, whether literal murking in Tara's case or metaphorical murking, is something that really happened a lot in the end of Season 6. With Anya, Spike and Tara all being pushed to the sidelines or eliminated entirely, mostly for the reason of allowing us to spend more focus on the Slayerettes that turn up in Season 7. Which ends up being a fucking terrible idea, because most of the Slayerettes just suck, or don't have more than a single personality trait, especially a certain someone who is going to come up in a paragraph or two. It's rough that Joss Whedon committed to basically removing a lot of these characters that were a big deal for the narrative, that were a big pull for a lot of the audience to come back, and replacing them with people that the audience could not have cared less about. On the villain front, as we've already covered, a classic way for a show or movie to portray a gay person was by having them be a villain, and get punished for being the villain, thereby ensuring that nobody associated queerness with good and right and Christian moral values that infected the shit out of media for a hell of a long time. To suddenly change the script on this long-standing and iconic lesbian relationship by having one of them die to motivate the other into becoming the big bad enemy for the rest of the straight gang and people is almost a betrayal of what they stood for, is a gut-wrenching and painful narrative choice seemingly more designed to punish the queers for daring to have something that they could cling onto.
The pain. No, it's too much. Oh, it's just too much.
But it's not surprising in Buffy, to be honest, especially by this season. Every character was miserable in Season 6, and a lot of the fun of the show had kind of been sapped away and deposited into, I guess, Angel? Angel was still, like, a really good time at this point, so I guess Angel was sucking up all the happy funness of the Buffy plotlines and using it to make you want to go and watch that instead. And while Season 7 tried to resolve some of these threads, tried to pull back from the real low that was the emotional gut punch of Season 6, in many ways it didn't succeed in doing that. I think that unfortunately Tara and Willow were just the biggest casualty of that turn into darkness and pain and trying to be like a real edgy show, and it just sucks that it had to be the case. There were other ways of handling this narrative, of giving motivations to characters to sufficiently cap off the ending of this season that didn't have to rely on fridging and heel turns for the one young queer couple that we had on TV at the time. And that mention of Season 7 brings us to my final point about Willow and Tara, a point that isn't so much about Tara because she's dead and buried, but is in fact about the almost desperate way that Joss Whedon tried to go back on his choice of killing Tara off. As we mentioned from the Amber Benson part of this video, there were actual possibilities that she was going to come back, that Buffy was going to receive the ability to alter reality, and that she would do it to return Tara to Willow. But that plan was scuppered by a mixture of fear from the actress about returning to the set, and also by the introduction instead of Kennedy. Kennedy is one of the Slayerettes that are introduced to become Buffy's army to fight the first evil, before Willow uses magic to activate all those potentials near the end of the season, giving the women the superpowers to fight vampires and demons. And honestly, the Slayerettes are very poorly handled in the show, with a common joke being that each episode is just the Slayerettes sit around and do like one thing before Buffy says some inspirational speech that brings them all back together, and that continues for like 17 episodes until they kick Buffy out. Kennedy is also a lesbian, and a spoiled brat who openly embraces that part of themselves, and there is nothing believable about Willow ending up with Kennedy at all. It just seems to be that they're the only two gay characters around, so why not put them together? And, I guess also Joss Whedon is desperately trying to apologise to queer people and appease us by giving us something so we can stop bombarding him with anger over Tara dying.
Our foreplay was threatening to turn into 12 play. Something not right?
Does it work as appeasement? Much like Neville Chamberlain and Hitler, that's a bad analogy, I should cut that out in the video. No. Aside from the complete lack of romantic tension between the two, and the awkward way that they come together and then just sort of happen, doing it right after what happened in Season 6, right after we get the culmination of 3 seasons worth of queer build-up between 2 Sapphic witches who are believable and whose actors clearly seem to actually care about making us care about them, Kennedy is a poor replacement and never manages to really escape that cursed perception of her. Ultimately, the queer representation just kinda peters out. It's still there, but the heart is gone. The soul that really connected with the viewer has fled the show, and all we are left with is the poor attempts by a straight cis man to appease the fanbase that he screwed over in the first place. The only good thing that can be said about Season 7 and Kennedy is when her and Willow hook up for the first time in The Killer and Me, and Willow finds herself transformed into Warren, which she believes is because she is punishing herself for betraying Tara and the guilt she feels over moving on.
I kissed you just for a second, but it was enough. I let her go. I didn't mean to.
Kissing me didn't mean
No.
that.
She was never gone. She was with me. We should have been forever. And I let her be dead. She's really dead.
This penance malediction is effectively transforming Willow into the man who killed her lesbian lover, physically and mentally as well, and if given time would turn her almost fully into this most spiteful and shitty of men. Though the theme of the episode is ruined slightly by it not actually being caused through Willow's own guilt manifesting magically, but in fact it being her guilt being triggered by Amy, another witch whose whole existence on the show has been a slow spiral into being a terrible fucking person, who uses magic out of mostly just jealousy and envy and being a bad person reasoning, and who's working with Warren, that flayed guy who I'm pretty sure is dead, but who Amy has kept alive because evil people are gonna evil together, and like, Warren can come back, but I guess fuck Tara, I suppose. The hex is ultimately lifted because Kennedy makes out with Willow in Warren form, and that make out lifts Willow's guilt over Tara dying and her getting over it. I guess.
I am good.
Look, Season 7 is not my favourite season for a lot of reasons, and it really does feel like the epitome of the Joss Whedon issue, something that I'll get into later in his own chapter. Look, I'm setting you up to keep watching this so you can figure out what the fuck I'm gonna do in the future. Pretty manipulative YouTuber stuff, right? Pretty smart of me. This week's sponsor is me being a piece of shit and having you on the hook for future comments. I don't pay very well.
Life's a show and we all play our parts.
Okay, so look. It's no secret that when it comes specifically to the interactions between Joyce and Buffy, that being a Slayer is effectively treated as an analogy for being queer. It's so blatantly on the nose that this is what it's heavily trying to do with this characterization, and it is interesting how it's a specific theme that targets a single character only. Like, being a Slayer around the other characters in Buffy is more often a metaphor for destiny or responsibility, or life being out of your hands and struggling to deal with having what you want and what others have decreed you must do by virtue of a random chance of you becoming the Slayer. But with Joyce, it is explicitly and unequivocally a thinly veiled attempt to portray a gay kid and their uncertain, semi-supportive parent. Let's start at the beginning. Initially, Joyce, And also, I guess, Hank, the person who deserves an award for Shitty Father of the Year, because he appears mostly at the beginning of the show, and then basically vanishes into his new life and leaves Buffy behind. Exactly one of her fears that we see represented in, like, the first season. I mean, shit, the guy doesn't even turn up when Joyce dies. That's a really bad father. He's, what, busy with his work, with another woman? My guy, your daughter just lost her mum, you need to get over there. Like, God, Hank is a terrible person. And it's weird because he goes from, like, being, like, slightly absent but, like, an okay dad to just being terrible. But, anyway, tangent about Hank Summers aside, Joyce doesn't believe Buffy about being the Slayer originally. And so she goes away to an asylum for a while before convincing her parents that she no longer believes any of that stuff, and is just a normal schoolgirl again. Admittedly, the whole going to the asylum might be slightly inspired by the burning a gymnasium to the ground as well, which in the queer sense is a metaphor for making out with another girl in the locker rooms. Maybe. I don't know. Could be. Riverdale had a guy who made out with a dude in the locker rooms, and then he got taken away to an evil convent asylum where they turned him into a gargoyle king sycophant who then tries to kill his own gay son when he comes out. And why are we talking about Riverdale? I'm watching it right now, that's probably why, but like, now there's a show with bad queer stuff in it. I should do a Riverdale episode. Anyway, yeah, this asylum thing isn't an entirely unusual occurrence within more classical interpretations of queerness. As in real life, homosexuality or bisexuality was seen as diseases of the mind that could be cured through conversion therapy or psychological treatment. A truly horrifying and in some places continuing situation. But Buffy covers up her slayerness to appease her parents, and she moves with Joyce to a new school somewhere that nobody knows her. Unfortunately, being a slayer is not something that Buffy can deny, or that she can pretend she isn't, and it catches up to her in Sunnydale. Knowing that her mother can't handle hearing that stuff, Buffy decides to keep it secret from her, and to keep the supernatural events secret as well. Although there is an interesting discussion to be had about the ending of the episode Gingerbread, wherein Buffy and Willow talk about how both their mothers seem to have a selective memory when it came to both of them and their slayerness/witchness. A parallel which carries throughout the entire episode, and what have we said about witches being lesbian as fuck already, right? Slayers, witches, lesbian... the pieces are all there. We will talk about Gingerbread more when it comes to its time, so let's stay on track with the, going through this bit by bit. This eventually all comes to a head with Joyce discovering that the Slayer thing is actually real when Buffy stakes a vampire right in front of her with the help of Spike at the end of Season 2. Oof. Also, as cool as it is, I am regretting the shit out of this leather jacket. It was like a choice design for like the episode, like everyone wears leather in Buffy, but like it is so hot. Anyway, Joyce reacts with a mixture of confusion, denial, and anger, eventually leading to her telling Buffy that if she goes to challenge Angel to fulfill her Slayer duty, that she cannot come back home. Which leads to Buffy leaving Sunnydale after stabbing Angel and fucking off to the big city to do an episode about how bad labour exploitation is by defeating capitalist demons with a hammer and sickle-esque mambale, which could also be seen as a reference to Sinea and the African heritage of the Slayer moniker too, if you were looking at it that way. When Buffy comes back to Sunnydale, things are tense between her and her mother, and there was a massive argument during Dead Man's Party, which features this quote in particular between them, that queerly showcases the gay running theme in the Slayerness.
You're the one who said I should go. You said if I leave this house, don't come back. You found out who I really was, and you couldn't deal. Don't you remember?
Buffy, you didn't give me time. You just dumped this thing on me and you expected me to get it. Well, guess what? Mom's not perfect, okay? I handled it badly. But that doesn't give you the right to punish me by running away.
You.
Following this argument, which is diffused by a bunch of zombies attacking the house and causing everyone to realise how much they still need each other and that they want each other around and are friends, it's kind of surprising how many problems in Buffy are solved by monsters attacking. Buffy and Joyce settle into this routine of Joyce attempting to be a more supportive parent, even going so far as to say in Faith, Hope and Trick this particular line.
When did you die? You never told me you died.
No, it was just for a few minutes.
Oh, I hate this. I hate your life.
Mom,
I know you didn't choose this. I know it chose you. I have tried to march in the Slayer Pride Parade, but I don't want you to die.
Joyce's mixture of fear and supportiveness over her daughters now revealed to her life, something that I think a lot of queer kids can recognise from their own parents, especially in that time period, is so fucking on the nose. They literally said Slayer Pride Parade. How can you deny that metaphor at that point, right? But all of this comes to a head in that previously mentioned episode, Gingerbread, where Joyce, under the influence of a demon who appears as 2 slain children to motivate towns into witch hunts and murdering innocent people, forms the group Moo, or Mothers Opposed to the Occult, a clear reference to the satanic panic around D&D in the 1980s, which led to various parent-centric groups that would attempt to monitor their children under fear of what they were doing. And also the continual groups that crop up around any queer stuff that kids could be getting into, and push this notion that their children have been indoctrinated by an agenda that has stolen them away, such as the gay panic of the 80s and 90s, and also the modern version of this that we can see with the anti-trans movement and gender-critical parent groups like Mumsnet Online. Wow. I bet you didn't think that I'd get to reference all of that in this Buffy video, and you are a fool. I will always bring that up. I will always find a way to reference that trans shit, baby. Anyways, Moo is inspired by Joyce's sentiments that the town has been taken over by the monsters, the slayers and the witches, as we can see in this particular quote that says exactly that.
For too long, we've been plagued by unnatural evils. This isn't our town anymore. It belongs to the monsters and the witches and the slayers. I say it's time for the grown-ups to take Sunnydale back.
So to take the town back, they begin to enact stricter and stricter laws to tighten the grip on the children, including locker searches for any occult or witchy items, and finally ending with the suspected children being dragged away by mobs and put on the stake to be burned. Now, we already covered how in many cases witches and lesbians were mixed together, and oftentimes those found of doing improper sexual acts in the time period of the witch hunts were accused of being a witch for it, as that was a far more simple and easy way to accept that it was wrong than to consider that it occurred without satanic interference. Because then that would mean that God made them gay without the devil's involvement, and Christianity just could not handle that kind of comprehension. Interestingly enough, the individuals who are dragged to the stake, who take the place of the targeted queer/occult members, are of course the 2 witches of Amy and Willow, but also the Slayer herself, Buffy. It's interesting and very on point that Buffy would get placed on that same pedestal. It isn't a wild concept at all, considering that by this point we know that being a witch and being a Slayer basically have a lot of the same themes. Women's empowerment, connection to a greater magical essence beyond oneself, and of course, all of that there gay shit. From all of those references, what I think should be patently clear by this point is that being a Slayer is, in the same way as the witches, utilised as a gay reference point by the show, in a very heavy-handed manner. It's done to such a degree in relation to Joyce that it really makes you think, what would it be like if there were 2 Slayers? If 2 characters who had this thematic queerness coming out nature to them were to meet. I wonder what that would be like.
Walking through the part, nothing seems to penetrate my heart.
Oh right, that did actually happen. In that episode we mentioned Faith, Hope and Trick, and continuing basically all the way through Season 3. Now, we're not going to get deep into all that stuff around Faith, we're just going to focus on the queer stuff, and especially the queer stuff that existed as Sapphic undertones between Faith and Buffy. And I also want to make it clear before we start 2 things. The first is that discussing this potential romantic connection and conceptual relationship is not in any way, shape or form me shipping these characters. I don't think they should be together. I don't think that Faith is good for Buffy or anything like that. It's more just that this is what existed and can be interpreted from the characters. The second thing is that this lesbian subtext is purely subtext, and is not something that is even definitively leaned into by the creator of the show, Joss Whedon. While Jane Espenson, another writer, repeatedly discussed with Whedon how the Sapphic nature existed in what they had written between Buffy and Faith, Joss Whedon himself continually denied it right up until this NPR interview in 2009, where he had this to say about it.
And somebody said, oh, there's lesbian subtext, and I just blew up. I was like, you guys see lesbian subtext behind every corner. I mean, you know, when Buffy's mom had a friend over, you're all lesbian subtext. I'm like, guys, you just want to see girls kissing. It's not lesbian subtext. And get over it. And the person who wrote it said, we would like you to go to our website where we have dissected every episode and written our treatise about the lesbian subtext. I went on it and came back and apologized. It was like, everything you said is true. It's all right there.
Effectively, it was supposedly accidentally written more than decisively chosen, but I think that's more just down to how they set up the slayerness, and how the actresses played their parts into this very blatant queerness, because it's pretty obvious subtext to the degree that I think only a straight cis boy like Joss Whedon could miss it slapping him in the face. Or, you know, maybe he was just too busy abusing women on set. Who knows? There are plenty of moments throughout the season wherein we see that Faith is clearly at least obsessively interested in being around Buffy a lot. Specifically, one can think of the entirety of the episode Bad Girls, where Faith turns up, draws a love heart on the window to get Buffy to come out and go slaying with her, and then they end up dancing pretty close to each other in the club.
Hey, girlfriend. Bad time?
No, she can't.
One of the writers for the show specifically says that this exact scene was inspired by what they saw in their own school at one point, where a girl came up to the window, drew a love heart, and the other girl went out with them, presumably not to do slaying, but maybe to do something else, you know, more gay? On top of this, there's also the fight during Enemies, wherein Faith kisses Buffy on the forehead before bouncing, which in the original shooting script was meant to be a kiss on the lips before the censors got their hands on it. And wait. I know there's this trope of, like, villains kissing the hero as, like, take that, I surprised you with a kiss. It's like, take that kiss is, like, an actual trope that gets used quite a bit. But how the fuck was a kiss on the lips in the original goddamn shooting script, but Joss Whedon didn't get or refused to accept the lesbian subtext here? How fucking stupid can one man be? Actually, it's Joss Whedon pretty stupid, I guess. But this kiss is returned by Buffy in Graduation Day, when she kisses Faith on the forehead after Faith, in the shared Slayer dream that they get, tells her the weakness of Mayor Wilkins, and then gives her some of the Slayer power to basically wake Buffy up, in a scene that is pretty clearly played by Eliza Dushku to have some romantic tension to it.
Getting towards that time.
How are you gonna fit all this stuff?
Not gonna. It's yours.
I can't use all of this.
Just take what you need. You ready?
These forehead kisses are also a big deal too. A kiss on the lips can be some way just a take that kiss, but a forehead kiss is so much more closer, so much more implicative of some deep-seated connection that goes beyond that. Parents will forehead kiss their children. Romantic people will forehead kiss the person when they're saying goodbye. A kiss that is not necessarily a romantic one, I mean there are plenty of non-romantic foreheaded kisses, but it implies a deep connection that makes a lot of interesting ideas about Faith and Buffy. And in fact, most of the Faith/Buffy stuff can really be attributed to Eliza Dushku leaning pretty hard into it, as we can see from Eliza talking about it during the 2011 Dragon Con.
I think Faith probably, swang both ways, or she had a definite thing for Buffy, no doubt, but there were a lot of innuendos, and there was a lot of heat there, and I think we were on what was the network?
The WB.
We were the WB, so I think there was only so far that they wanted to take that. And I don't know what was going on in Joss's head. I do know what was going on in Joss's head. He probably couldn't go there. I mean, and then there was the whole Willow and Tara romance, and so it was kind of fun to just play around with it. And because then we both had Angel, and we were fighting over him, and it was just this kind of animalistic, woman on woman thing. Yeah.
Honestly, it's kind of hard to do this segment any real justice because almost every scene involving Faith and Buffy has some kind of contextual analysis that one could consider in this light. And honestly, the only real way to properly understand it would be for you to go back and rewatch the show yourself with that Sapphic subtext in mind. Whether we are talking Faith's clear jealousy over Angel spending time with Buffy, which leads to a mirror between her and Xander, as both are anti-Angel because he is seen as an obstacle between them and the target of their affection, to Buffy and Faith spending time in that dream sequence and making a bed together during this year's Girl, to Faith stealing Buffy's body and then deciding to immediately take a bath with it. All of this builds a case of some kind of attraction. Whether that attraction is good or bad is not necessarily a judgment that needs to be made for it to be considered as queer analogy. It is somewhat clear from the seasons that Buffy does not necessarily return the same obsessive interest that Faith has in her, even though we know that Buffy is at least a little bi-curious, as she hooks up with a Slayer in season 8 of the comics. But before that, she is very much a boy-only Slayer. However, Faith represents a temptation, represents a disruption of that established norm, and the possibility of Buffy considering something else or spending time with her in that capacity subtextually. Something which extends beyond just the queer label too, as Faith is meant to be the dark Slayer, who tempts Buffy into questioning the authority of the Watcher's Council, and those established rules around what she can and cannot do with her life so far that she's accepted. For Faith's side of this conversation, it's hard to tell if she wants Buffy or if she wants to be Buffy, as during that body swap episode of Who Are You, where we see that Faith clearly wants to be Buffy, something that was hinted at all the way back in season 3, when she talked about how no matter what she does or how good she tries to act, that Buffy is the one who gets all the compliments and rewards for it regardless. We also get the sense during the fight scene in Who Are You, of just how much Faith hates herself. A part of that definitely feeding this weird, awkward jealousy, obsessiveness that defines her relation to Buffy.
Shut up! Do you think I'm afraid of you? You're nothing! Disgusting! Murderous bitch! You're nothing! You're disgusting!
But while that exact turn of events may not be replicable in queer culture, that notion, that subtext yet again, that metaphor of trying to find a dividing line between attraction, desire, jealousy, and wanting to be another is a common theme amongst gay and trans individuals during the period of growing up and finding their identity. It's not hard to see with all this context why so many people bought into the unspoken lesbian connection between Buffy and Faith. A lot of people could see themselves reflected in these characters, especially as they did differ significantly in the kind of queerness that they showcased than Willow and Tara. Rather than being softer, nerdier, feminine, Faith is raw, powerful, edgy, serious, and one hell of a bad girl acting out. And this really does build from all the stuff that we know about the Slayers, from the way that the actresses involved played it, from the subtle interactions that exist, that all combines together to form one big how the fuck did you not see this, Joss Whedon? Or were you just living in the biggest denial I've ever seen over it? My god, how were you showrunner? And you didn't, that didn't click, you know?
I've got a theory, we should work this out. It's getting eerie.
Okay, look. I know that when I title something A Brief Anything, that people immediately expect it to turn out to be a massive 5-hour-long project. And that's my own fault for doing that meme at least twice. But trust me, this time I seriously mean it. we're not going to waste a bunch of time discussing Angel and Spike here, because honestly, there isn't that much to say about them or to go in depth about them in regards to queerness, and we gotta wrap this up soon so this can be a short video. I know there are some Angel and Spike fans, and trust me, I'm an Angel and Spike fan. I love Angel. I think Spike's a great character, and I think his tenure, John Masters' acting is incredible, and John Masters and David Boreanaz have great chemistry together, and that really comes across, because what I want to discuss here is how the vampires are allowed to be more queer in the Buffy/Angel series. How consistently we see that there's an element of sexual tension that exists between all of them, and that it's okay, or not so heavily censored, because vampires are almost designed to represent the punk, queer, dark subculture that goes out partying and dresses all up in leather. They're meant to be, if not villainous, then rebels. And part of that means adopting anti-establishment attitudes towards everything, including sexuality. And for the censors, it's not such a problem for the demon who sets up shop in a human's body to be homoerotic. That kind of fits the bill for the consistent portrayal of vampires in popular culture as queer adjacent, which leans into that censorship not applying to villains or monsters. It's why I didn't lump any of the vampires with the humans as dismissing them from this conversation due to their straight cisness, because that straight cisness doesn't have to exist and be reinforced by them. Their evil or inherent demonness gives them the freedom to break free from the bonds of what they are required to look or act like. And Buffy/Angel runs with that when it comes to their vampire's portrayal. I mean, the Master is such a stereotypical theatre kid-esque gay villain that it just hits you in the face from the first season, the first time you meet them. And Darla and Drusilla have an awful lot of sexual tension and, stuff going on when they meet once more in Angel. From all of this, what I want you to get is just that there were many avenues that queerness was explored in Buffy, from a variety of different perspectives and sides, and while it often did lean to what it could get away with doing to escape the censors, it did at least try and push the boundaries on that front, and was why I think it serves as inspiration for a lot of future writers and shows. The vampires were just one aspect of this that existed a little separate to the rest due to their natures, but it's all still there. See? A brief chapter. I promised brief, and I actually delivered this time. I wasn't memeing or joking. We can move on now. The next chapter's about Joss Whedon. Maybe we shouldn't move on, huh? Maybe, this is a Buffy video. It would be silly of me to not suddenly break into song like Once More with Feeling, right? Right, that's a cool reference. Let's do something like that. Let's
Will our lives become too stressful if ever that success?
We all knew this was coming eventually, and no matter how much one might want to separate the art from the artist so that you can consider their work separate from their ideology and scandal, that can only go so far, as Joss Whedon was the creator and steerer of the ship for the entirety of Buffy and Angel's run, overseeing every script to make sure that it matched his particular vision for the show. Therefore, it is kind of essential to consider Joss Whedon at least a little bit before we move on to the conclusion of this entire video essay. This is a complex one, because it's not so simple as Joss Whedon is a terrible dude who was manipulative and harassed people on his sets and abused actors and actresses, creating an incredibly toxic environment, and therefore, fuck him. I mean, all of that is true, but there are other things to consider here as well. And actually, okay, that may sound like I'm going to justify, but it's fine that he did all that because he had good episodes. It's not. Fuck Joss Whedon. Joss Whedon was involved in writing most of the highly acclaimed episodes of the entire show. Hush, The Body, Once More with Feeling, which holds the title for me of only musical episode that is actually better than a regular episode of the show. And it's undeniable that he is a talented writer and director. But within that talent also exists flaws. Flaws that come to light quite heavily when considering Buffy, and that do reflect back on that queer stuff. Quite often, a consistent theme in Buffy seasons is that they have a really great setup, a bunch of really good episodes that build towards this big moment, villains being established, lore being set up, characters going through these arcs with highs and lows bringing you along, hoping to see how it all pans out. And then, unfortunately, the payoff does end up being quite hit and miss. Endings and conclusions are not really Joss Whedon's strong suit. His best episodes are generally all mid-season, and are used to develop the themes that have been brought up. The Scooby Gang struggling to realign themselves in the new post-high school dynamics is represented in Hush, with all of them fighting the monsters in isolation from one another, in complete silence as they fail to really communicate the issues with each other. That then ends up turning into Adam. Fucking Adam. The only thing even slightly related to that theme from Adam is when Spike tries to break up the Scooby Gang using that divisiveness and the Yoko factor. And that isn't even Adam, that's Spike. Okay, that's a lie. The gang does need to combine their powers together to give Buffy the ability to be Adam, so like it does confirm that whole they need to stick together and do need each other to be able to succeed, although literally the next episode Giles decides to bounce because he feels unneeded, so like, I don't know how well that thematically landed, because it feels like they chucked it out immediately. Or in The Body, when we come to terms with the fact that Joyce is gone. The Buffy now has to effectively become a mother to Dawn, and that really influences the theme of how the Summers need to stick together, regardless of if one is a person made from a Hellkey by a bunch of monks, that ends up resolving in Buffy killing herself to save Dawn by closing the portal. Which, to me personally, I don't particularly like as continuing that theme, as it seems more like Buffy abdicating responsibility for Dawn's future in saving it for now. I'm sure that's going to be a controversial take. I think a lot of people really like The Gift, but that's my subjective opinion around that theme's resolution, and this is my subjective video essay, so you're stuck being subjected to it. Or Once More with Feeling, which yet again emphasises how the Scooby Gang has been lying and manipulating and falling out with one another due to the secrets that they have kept. Secrets that are only released through the power of musical theatre, which ends up leading to Willow going dark after Tara gets killed and then being talked down by Xander. All those secrets and those issues have actually kind of resolved themselves in a variety of ways by seeing red. And then there's this additional shit show tacked on the end to give us a big bad for the last few episodes. And this build-up, followed by this poor resolution of themes, this sort of petering out into an underwhelming conclusion of the emotional investment that we've put in, does apply to the queer themes as well, as every queer text or subtext is built up to be something before awkwardly kind of just going away, or being pushed to the side, or replaced with something else that doesn't really fulfill its promise. Larry gets killed, and then we never hear about them again. Faith is bounced around between Buffy and Angel when she wakes up, and doesn't really stick until the comics. There's no real continuation of the Sapphic undertones that heavily post-season 5. Tara is... God. I mean, Tara just gets it really rough.
I'm tired of crying. I'm just so tired, Alfred.
And Willow ends up flopping into season 7 with Kennedy? Nobody cares about Kennedy. All of this tells me one thing, and tells me to tell you the same thing, which is that who Joss Whedon is as a writer does come across in the text and subtext of the queer characters, for better or worse. It's impossible to consider them without considering the fact in the construction of them and how positively one can think about his writing around that queerness. Yes, Joss Whedon did go to bat very hard to try to get that queer stuff in there. But he also handled it pretty poorly, and it ended up going places that were not very encouraging for the queer audience. It also makes me wonder that even if it had more queer people involved or had been developed in a different time period, if it would have still had the same problems, as Joss Whedon was the one making it. It also makes me consider stuff like if Firefly is only so beloved because he never got a chance to whiff it, and we only really got the development setup, not the conclusion. Although one can look at Serenity and think, oh yeah, I guess Joss Whedon did end up doing the ending and fucked it up in the end anyway, so yeah, seems kind of accurate.
Battle's done, and we kind of won, so we sound our victory cheer. Where do we go from here.
So here we are, at the end. And now comes the question of, am I going to screw the shit out of this one like Joss Whedon himself would? Really just tripping and smashing through the last hurdles to get over the finish line. Although personally, I already worry immensely that the previous 2 chapters have really been a season 4 to this whole video essay. A Buffy reference that if you get it, you get it. In consideration of everything we've talked about, and everything to be considered, I think the big takeaway from all of this, from all these various elements, is that Buffy is, at its heart, a queer show. It has consistent queer characters and queer analogies that are evocative of the lives of the people who would watch it, who would come to love Buffy because it gave them a look into their own lives through characters who are meant to be the same age that they are, whether in high school or college. Ultimately, whether it's good or bad, and my pure honest take on that would be that it's a mixture of both, that it incorporates representation that we can be inspired by, while also using tropes or stereotypes that maybe need to stay buried for a good reason. This show means a lot to a lot of people, myself included. It existed at a time when what a lot of queer people desperately needed was to be able to see themselves, or to be able to have themselves reflected in a media that wasn't trying so hard to appeal to mainstream audiences that it crippled the more overt gay or sapphic messages. And in Buffy, that was to some degree found. It's no wonder that it's gone on to influence and serve as the basis for a whole host of modern LGBTQ entertainment, because I have no doubt that many of those writers and directors and actors/actresses grew up on that, and that it was influential to them. It could have been better. That's basically the case for almost anything, really. But for what it was doing, and when it was doing it, it provided something that could not be found elsewhere. And that was definitively important and required on the landscape of popular culture and queer media. Buffy isn't great, but it also is great, and we have to align those 2 ideas when we consider the show. So that's that. If you liked what I did, or said, or just really needed something to confirm your opinion, or to go against and inspire you to write a comment about how stupid I am for missing something, then that's all I can really hope for with these videos. If that is the case, then it would be cool to leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, or dress up as one of the characters from Buffy and go to your nearest gay bar to tell them that the video has released. Rejoice, my fellow queers! There is a Buffy video about the gayness in it, and you can go check it out on this channel right now. All of which is massively helpful towards YouTube caring about me enough to put me in the old algo, I guess. If you really want to help this channel, the best way to do that is to go to my Patreon or my Ko-Fi, as that is the most viable way to financially ensure that I can keep making these videos in between studying and working. Especially because I would love to be able to keep doing this as some kind of full-time gig. That would be fantastic, something I'd love to do, because I love making these and I love having people engage with them, and I love like giving people this sort of information and like forming connections through that kind of thing. But it doesn't mean that it needs to pay for, you know, like housing and rent and electricity, which are all essentials I need to keep making these videos. Everything else, redundant, but I do need those. On the screen right now should be some names. The names of the people who have already subscribed to my Patreon and are keeping this channel and me afloat through their immense kindness. A kindness that I can only really repay by getting more and more gay with my videos, and significantly more unhinged with that gayness, if at all possible. Seriously though, it means the world to me to have people consider what I do worth caring about in this sort of capacity. So it is really nice to see this sort of support. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great slay.
All those secrets you've been concealing, say you're happy now, once more with feeling.
Fuck, this is gonna be a nightmare. But